We return to Ladies Can We Talk with host Debbie Georgatos on 660 AM The Answer.
Hello there. Welcome back to Ladies Can We Talk. This is Debbie Georgatos, and so glad you've tuned in tonight. You know, we talked in the last segment briefly, actually the whole segment mostly, about the Kentucky court and the Kentucky clerk who has declined to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples. And I meant to say something at the beginning that I think is really important to keep in mind. It's always true the left tries to make things as though the question is hate or not hate. You either are, homophobic or you agree with gay marriage. And that is not where I want to go in this show. What I want to talk about in this show, it's not about people who are gay or not. We all have family members and friends and loved ones who live that lifestyle. It's about who decides in America what the law is and who decides the rightness or wrongness of an important thing like marriage. And that's really what we're trying to get at tonight. And so with that said, we have a guest on the line this evening, Pastor Stephen Broden. Good evening, sir.
Well, good to be with you, Debbie.
Happy to have you. Pastor Broden ran for Congress, and I actually worked on his campaign. And he is a community leader, a pro-life leader. He's just a stand-up person for Christian values in our society. And we were talking the other day, Pastor Broden was telling me about something that he is pursuing that relates to the marriage decision by the Supreme Court. And one way that the people of Texas could stand up and protest having the Supreme Court decide this issue for us. So I was hoping you'd tell our listeners all about it.
Well, I'm involved in a group that I started called the Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrate, which is simply interposition or nullification of any unconstitutional acts that come out of the central government. It is an idea that was set forth and defined by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison many years ago when our second president, John Adams, was involved in an action that the Federalists were promoting that was connected with the French War that was happening at the time. And America was being drawn into that war. And John Adams decided that anyone that would say anything negative about our country or negative about his administration, either in word and or written, would be subject to penalties of a fine, an economic fine of $1,000, and put in jail. This violated the compact, that is the Constitution and the First Amendment. But everyone was afraid to say anything about it, so Thomas Jefferson wrote to the state of Kentucky and to Virginia and said that the right to determine whether something is unconstitutional or not is not determined by the federal government. It is determined by the states. And if it is indeed unconstitutional, the states have a right to nullify any of those acts, legislation, policies, or executive orders that violate the Constitution. And I submit to you that SCOTUS, in its decision concerning same-sex marriage, violated the Constitution. Their appeal is to the 14th Amendment and the due process portion of that amendment. Justice Thomas, in his dissent, defined very clearly how this was a violation of those principles, and it did not comport with or comply with the language of the 14th Amendment. It is a superimposition of the court on the Constitution, which violates the Constitution, making it unconstitutional, thereby invoking on the part of our legislators and our governor here in the state of Texas the right to nullify that unconstitutional act.
I am so glad you spelled all that out. I've been trying to furiously take notes while you were talking. It's interesting, I will say, Pastor Broden, in the last 6 years, I think since President Obama was elected, we've had more Americans turning back than ever before in my lifetime, looking back at the Declaration of Independence, at the Constitution, at what the structure of government is supposed to be like, and becoming aware of things like you just described, where the early founders did pave a path for us. They did tell us what we could be doing in situations like this.
Oh, absolutely. I think where we've erred is that we have not been trained, we have not been educated, and we do not understand what it is that our founding fathers have given to us. This doctrine of the lesser magistrate, the lesser magistrate doctrine declares that when a superior or higher civil authority makes an unjust or immoral law, and that's part of the definition of what the lesser magistrate is, an immoral law or decree, the lesser or lower ranking civil authority has both the right and the duty to refuse obedience to the superior authority. See, what has happened is that we believe that the Supreme Court is the final arbiter of what is constitutional and what is not. That is not the case. That was never the intent of the founding fathers, nor was it the intent of the compact that they entered into to create the federal government. That's just like you create something and then you leave the definition of what that is to that which you have created. The creator is the one who determines what is and what is not constitutional. And in this case, that's the states. We created this thing called the federal government. The states did. And when the states determine that an act or an edict is unconstitutional against the Constitution of the United States and the state constitution, and by the way, the state of Texas has within its constitution, Article 1, Section 32, as you well know, it defines marriage as between a man and a woman. That's the state of Texas constitution. And this particular decision violates our state constitution. And the question is, do they violate that based upon their interpretation of the Constitution, that our Constitution is unconstitutional as it relates to the Constitution of the United States? There is nothing, let me repeat, there is nothing in the Constitution of the United States that gives our federal government a right to determine what marriage is. It does not exist. Therefore, its decision to define it is extremely unconstitutional. As you know, Debbie, that when Justice Roberts wrote in his dissent that this action on the part of these 5 jurists was unconstitutional, he said this, quote, "The majority decision is an act of the will, not legal judgment. The right is announced. The right it announces has no basis in the Constitution or this court's precedent." That's Justice Roberts in his dissent. That's what he said about it. And that gives us, I think, fodder for the fight. Fodder for the fight. Because ultimately, we determine whether it's constitutional or not. The final arbiter of whether something is constitutional or not as it relates to the state of Texas resides with the people in the state of Texas, not the Supreme Court.
I'm thrilled you're telling us all about this. I really am. It's fascinating, and I hope everyone is listening and actually taking note, because the next thing I want to ask you is you have both a petition and a website that relate to this. Can you share that?
Oh, absolutely. We started a group. I did here recently after this horrific decision came down called Protect Life and Marriage TX. And that's where you go to find our petition. It's www.protectlifeandmarriagetx.org. On that website, you'll find our petition, of course. Read the petition. Anyone reading that petition cannot help but to sign that petition. The language is such that you will agree what we're saying is constitutional. It's based upon the founding principles, and it's based upon the Constitution of the state of Texas, where we are invoking or demanding that Governor Abbott invoke interposition, nullification of this law, of this decision by the Supreme Court.
Pastor Broden, oh, sorry, go ahead.
There you'll also find an explanation as to who we are and why we are. And so it's an exercise in information that will help you to have an informed opinion and an informed response to this horrifying decision that was made by the Supreme Court.
Pastor Broden, do you know whether or not Governor Abbott, does he know about this effort yet?
No, I don't think he knows about it. I think he knows about lesser magistrate. I think he knows about it. and I think our Attorney General, Ken Paxton, knows about it. And it would be those two men, with the support of we the people, that will give them the intestinal fortitude to step forward and say no. But we're living in a strange time, and we're living in a time in which there is a deliberate attempt on the part of the elite in this country to redefine who we are as a nation, and that definition leaves void the Judeo-Christian ethic that undergirds and underpins who we are. They are attempting to redefine us away from our Christian and Judeo-Christian heritage and into a secular, humanistic view of life and living that flows from man and not God. It is important for us as believers, Christians, those who are Christians who are listening to your program, to know that if we are, the Bible says, is it best for us to obey man or God? You make that decision. But Peter says, as for me, we're going to obey God. We're going to obey God. And obeying God is what Kim did in Kentucky. She stood on God's principles. And that's why it was important for us to understand that as we stand up in this effort for a lesser magistrate, it is not just that which is unconstitutional or unjust. It's also immoral, that which is immoral. Any unjust or immoral decree or law, we have a right to stand up when it goes against the laws of nature and of nature God. That's part of the language of the Declaration of Independence, the law of nature and of nature's God. When any law is unjust and immoral, we must stand and push back. And the standing that we do is what is called the lesser magistrate or nullification.
Okay.
May I add just one more thought?
Certainly.
that what we're asking of our state officials, our governor and Ken Paxton, is their duty. They must do that. That's what we hired them for. We hired them as one of their duties as the sovereign state and government is to protect the citizens of the state from overreach by the federal government. That is, to restrain the federal government, to constitutionally restrict and limit them by pushing back against extra constitutional endeavors. Now, you as a lawyer understand that language, extra constitutional. That means that which goes beyond the limit enumerated in the Constitution that defines what the federal government is to do. When they go beyond those limits and beyond that definition, it is incumbent, it is the duty, it is the right of our governor, our attorney general, our state legislators to stand up and say, no, we will not follow extra constitutional edicts and decisions and opinions. And we cannot depend upon them to make the definition as to what is constitutional or not. If we do that, then we've abdicated what was given to us by the states as they formalized and pulled together this compact and produced this creature called the federal government.
We're speaking tonight with Pastor Stephen Broden, and sir, I just cannot thank you enough for that extremely articulate, passionate, logical, well laid out argument for the idea that we have much more we as the state of Texas and we as the people of Texas can do to fight back against the United States Supreme Court decision, which it had, as I said in my segment, and you're saying too, had no legal authority to make. It was outside the role of the Supreme Court, outside the role of the federal government for the Supreme Court to issue the ruling they did in the marriage case. And so I just appreciate very much everything you laid out. I encourage people to go to your website. You gave the name a second ago. It's Protect Texas Marriage. Say it one more time.
Protect Life and Marriage Text. That's lifeandmarriagetx.org.
Okay.
Protect Life and Marriage TX
Okay, I urge our listeners to go. Pastor Broden, thank you so very much for calling in tonight. I appreciate everything you said, and I encourage our listeners to please go to the website Pastor Broden just gave you and to really think through how much more you could be doing to stand up against this decision that really is just it's culture changing, it's society changing, and it was made by a court that didn't have the authority to make it. And we, the people, need to stand up for our culture and for America.